Welcome to Art Crush, the podcast where artists Fee Marks and Paula Telizyn talk about art, the art world, colonialism in art, art institutions, and more. Welcome, Fee, as we talk about another amazing art topic.
Thank you, Paula. It's such good fun, our podcast. I look forward to it every time. We just get so excited.
We do. Half the time we're talking, I think, gosh, we should put that in the podcast.
Exactly. But that's what podcasts should be about people being passionate about their subject area.
Well, so I also think about there are certain sort of structures for podcasts that we have kind of thrown out the window. Our listeners are getting a podcast that perhaps I've edited out all the ums that I like to put in, but we're not.
And if you know, apparently that's what I say.
Yeah, but we are not actually editing out the conversation. We're not polishing it up so that when you meet us, or if you have a chance to meet us glorious artists in person, it's not gonna feel like a totally different experience. You are getting us close to unedited, but edited for your own, sanity.
Yeah. 100%.
So we were talking about creativity in general and artists specifically before we started this podcast. So about the difference between being a creative person and actually being an artist and how that reflects in your life. So you were speaking about being a teacher and how you looked to produce curriculum and lessons that your students would be engaged with versus just running through a list of things you had to cover.
As Paula knows, and some of you might, my background initially was in theatre and drama. And so I was very much into using drama and art and then it's music, all the arts, as a tool for learning when I was working in education. And I would be looking all the time for creative ways to engage young people and get them to, through enjoyment, learn more and to also then facilitate their own learning. And so what I was saying before we started recording was I have always thought that I am a creative. Yes, I'm an artist as well, but at heart, I am a creative. And we've been talking a lot on the podcast about being creative with our businesses, with our art business. Whereas I think people, I don't know, maybe I'm wrong, Paula, but I think still the view of people to what an artist is somebody who creates images that look like something else is still very much. That's why so many kids get turned off art in school, because when they paint or draw, even though when they're 3 or 4, they do amazing uninhibited paintings, when they get to about 6 and 7, they suddenly say, "Oh, I can't draw anymore. I can't do that," because they get this thing in their head and it never gets erased. It's not like something they grow out of, that this is what art is. It looks like the landscape. It looks like this animal. It looks like this portrait of this person. Education's got a lot to blame for actually trying to work out, and a lot of adults, if you ask them what creativity is and when do you need creativity, because you need it in every aspect of life, they probably would struggle. I don't know if I'm saying, if that's unfair. What do you think, Paula?
One of the things I came across, because I spent the first part of my career actually doing computer programming and a whole bunch of other things in the internet world, is people would be like, "How could you be an artist and a programmer?" Because they didn't see the overlap, whereas an artist is a problem solver, how to communicate a certain idea or concept through visual means, and a programmer is the same thing, how to get a computer to do a certain task or certain things so that people are engaged with it and interact with it appropriately. It's the same thing, but just the details are different. And so I think a lot of people overlook that creativity is in every aspect of life. I have a amazing family doctor, absolutely love her. She's been my family's doctor since my youngest was 3, so 16 years. Actually, no, maybe even longer, but she's been in the our family physician for a long time, and I remember sitting down talking with her several years ago about because she was apologizing that she's not very creative, she's just a doctor, she's in awe of my books and my art and whatever, that's great, that's wonderful, but I said to her, like, "Stop. You take somebody who comes in and you look at their pallor, you take their pulse, you listen to what they're saying, and then you search for a solution creatively to what's going on with them, with all that knowledge that you have as a physician. How could you exist without being creative? Because you're immediately running through a list of things and going, this fits, but this angle doesn't work. Or if this happened, then that would be the result. Like she's doing it creatively. Diagnosing is just as creative as creating art. I think that we need to understand that creativity expresses itself differently in different occupations.
And this is what makes humans so special, is they have this creative muscle. And, we've talked a lot about AI and how it's taking over the arts. It can't take over the arts completely, only if people think that's all art is, something that looks like something else or is the same as everything else, generic art. AI is not creative. It is taking information and regurgitating it. And there's far too much of that being taught in schools because that doesn't last. People are not going to look at an AI image and it's going to be with them for the rest of their lives, because it won't have that power, because there hasn't been that creative muscle behind it.
I agree. I came across an interesting article actually this morning on Reddit, or linked from Reddit anyway, where a bunch of Americans were polled about how they would feel if they found out that a painting that they loved was AI. And most of them wouldn't care. It doesn't change their opinion of the painting, but then again, those aren't the people who are necessarily buying art anyway. The audience who was polled and their attitudes towards art, I think, are important in the results of the poll.
100%.
But it's that struggle we get as artists, educating our audiences to understand what's underneath the painting. Some people get it instinctively, like, if you paint this beautiful landscape and the light's hitting just so across the trees, people stop and their heart skips a beat. They can feel that power and that passion in the moment, but a lot of people don't go beyond that. They don't understand what's going on behind that immediate emotion. It's up to us as artists to educate our audiences to take that second and third look to understand what we're saying. And as you said, an AI can't do that. You tell an AI to create an image of a woman looking a little bit serious, and the AI will just gather up whatever the most common thing is. So I went through myself to play games with trying to get some angles of portraits of women. Not that I would paint from AI or use AI in that way, but just out of curiosity and playfulness. And I ended up with garbage because the AI was looking for commonality. So I said middle-aged woman, immediately she had jowls and gray hair. I'm a middle-aged woman, my hair is pink, right? Maybe I have jowls, maybe I don't. I don't think I do at this point, but, like, fuck off with immediately making an older woman into an old woman, which there's nothing wrong with being an old woman, but, like, that commonality, that assumption, humans don't make that. When I paint my portraits of women and men and all that, I'm not going, "Gosh, you're 47, so I better give you extra eye bags," because that's what people expect. Like, the AI isn't painting their heart and their soul and their whatever, it's missing that
Their
part.
essence. It's
Yeah.
about the essence, isn't it?
Yeah, but we sort of wandered off the path of creativity showing up in every aspect that people need to embrace that their jobs are creative. But in artists, that creativity is honed and it's visible and it's exercised intentionally because you can't be an artist and not have a level of knowing that you're creative. People tell you all the time, "Oh, you're so creative. Everybody's so creative," kind of attitude, whereas doctors and teachers and all that may not necessarily apply that word to their jobs.
I know, and if everybody knew, yes, I am using that creative muscle, it would be seen. It's about the difference between having a skill. You can learn a skill everybody could attend the same lessons and the same skills, but their actual output, what's going in and what comes out, is very, very different, because the output is the creative side of it. It's a bit like, is photorealistic art creative? I've had that debate with a lot of people. Highly skilled, but are they being creative as well? Or are they just copying what they see? What do you think,
Yeah.
Paul?
That's a really tough one because my answer, regardless, we are gonna is gonna alienate people, but when you do hyperrealistic work, you have to make choices about colors, and those are informed choices, but those are technically technical. Unless you are changing your source material in some way, I don't think photorealism is creative at all. I think that it's a skill, and it's an incredible skill. It's one that I used to aspire to when I was a teenager and in my early 20s going to art school. I desperately wanted to do photorealistic art. But it just wasn't something that I was able to make my, hands produce. It was my aspiration. But, yeah, I don't think it's
Yeah.
creative. I really don't. So if you're doing photorealistic art, I actually live in a whole other country than Canada. You can't find me here. Don't bomb my house. But no, I'm kidding. But it's as with everything, everything is an opinion, but there is no real creativity if you don't differentiate in some way from your source material. Artists are interpreters, and I think phones and being everywhere with cameras, everybody having a camera in their back pocket, has freed us up from needing to document in the way that we used to have to document before cameras were around. So 140 some odd years ago, or even a little bit longer, I can't remember when the first cameras came out, we had no way of documenting anything other than through creating art to document, to, have portraits of people, to document stories or events that have happened. We are now freed from that as artists, so hyperrealism, while it's admirable, and certainly the average person who's not an artist loves it and goes, "Oh my god, this is amazing. How is this?" Whatever. Unless you are doing something to differentiate it, it's not creative. But there are
That's the
exceptions.
key. That's the key. The
Yeah.
creativity is the differentiation and the spin that the artist puts on it.
The exception would be I saw an event of quilt making, and one quilt artist did hyper realistic landscapes using fabric. And that
Uh,
requires a level of creativity that the paint and the drawing of hyperrealism does not, because that's a wildly different medium. Who would have thought in quilting to do hyperrealism?
Exactly.
So
That is like genius, because they've used their creativity and their skills in order to come up with it's a bit like people who use collage, like magazines and whatever. I've seen some amazing work using magazines, colored magazines, to create very realistic pictures, but they're not copying, they're using that skill in a creative way. It is really, really interesting, and I do think there is a difference, because you can be a creative or you can be very skilled in one thing. For example, with music, the creativity, the big creativity in music is the person who is playing the instrument or is singing, it's their interpretation, it's what they are trying to say through the music that has been created by somebody else. The big creation is the person who's composed the music or composed the event, but then you've got the creativity of the performer, like same in acting,
mhm.
putting their spin. This is what I want to say as this character, as somebody else, through my instrument, through my voice.
How we embrace that, I think, affects how our art feels to our audience, how it's received. So if we go back to saying, okay, a teacher's creative and how they disseminate the information to their students and how engaged and passionate they are and how they present it, their students will receive it differently. In art, it's the same thing. How deeply we feel our topics, our whys about what we're trying to say with our work will affect the viewers in that case. So we were talking off recording about your current signature collection that you're working on and the stories that you're creating, about women unmasking themselves and embracing who they are and the passion that you feel for that subject. But the fact that you have to feel that deeply while you're creating affects your creativity in producing the art and in the connection people feel to it.
Yeah, when we were recording the episode about how you come up with the ideas for a signature collection, I was saying just off recording, that I had to feel we were coming up with ideas, and there was some that my brain was immediately like, "Yeah, I get that, but I'm rejecting that." Until you hear, it's a bit like meeting your perfect partner in a way, or you have that connection with people. You go, yeah, this pulls up this memory, this feeling, this is what I want to paint. And it's so clear. It's so clear. When we talked about having a, artist block, I often think that it's because artists haven't thought what they want to say and how they want to engage with that. It's something it's got to be important to you. You have got to resonate with it. And in the same way, when you buy a piece of art, the viewer or the collector is resonating with what is being communicated.
Mhm. That makes a lot of sense as somebody who has been struggling or has in the past struggled with artist block and lots of excuses about art making and everything else, which we talked about in the previous season of Art Crush, what happens when you fall out of love with your art and things like that, the ideas. Creativity requires processing a lot of information, a
Yep.
lot of flexing of a muscle, which we have to acknowledge because when we swing back to AI, a lot of people are now doing their brainstorming on AI and getting slot back. As we know, we've done that work as well, where we've tried to name something and AI has given us garbage. And then they lean more and more on it and lose that ability to brainstorm, to process a bunch of ideas and reject them. Creativity does take calories. It does take energy for our brains to do, but it's well worthwhile energy to spend, especially as artists. But I think in any job, it's
Yeah, it's vital. I mean, when I trained as a teacher, we had to spend a lot of time reflecting. Whether that still goes on now, I don't know. But it's such a good skill that when you have completed something, that you reflect on it, that you think about it, not in a critical, it's not about being critical in a way that, oh, that was terrible. Oh my gosh, I did that so badly. That you're not learning from that, but you are looking and you're going, okay, I really enjoy. This is the bit I really enjoyed. I want to take that further in my next piece. I really like this. I don't want it to be the same. And I think we talked about, when we talked about a signature collection, you are evolving as an artist and you don't want to go back. You can use some of the ideas from the past, but you're going to do it in a different way. And being a creative is about this evolving, looking at your work. So people are like, ah, yes, that's an early, or that's a later one. People talk about artworks as like that. Doesn't It's not the same. Somebody doesn't have a style and that sticks throughout, but you can tell often if it is a style that it comes from the artist's heart, that it's evolved. You can see that connection.
yeah, and the messaging I think also becomes more clear as artists become more clear as to what their work is saying. I mean, some artists can go through their entire career and just be like, "I like painting trees," and that's it, right? They're not going any deeper. But a lot of artists, their work becomes more clear, the messaging in it, because their creative muscle also becomes very well exercised and they question themselves and are not afraid to reject their own ideas. Not every idea we come up with is worthy of putting a crown on it. Some of them just belong to be fed out back to the pigs kind of thing, like it is what it is. And I think that's important to acknowledge. When I think about your earliest pieces, Fee, although you covered a lot of the same subject matter in a way, they weren't speaking the same way that your current pieces do now, where you're pulling from
No.
stories that women experience and stages that a lot of women go through who are changing their lives for the better or trying to remove. I'm stuck on the current piece you're working on, which it will be done by the time this podcast episode airs, but the unmasking is such
And
a.
the selection of masks.
Yes.
Use it's also about it in my head as well. These women could be either hanging up their masks or they could be taking the masks off the wall and going, this is the person that I need to be at this minute. So it's like that evolvement of, that it's a choice sometimes that we make for ourselves, might be through pressures of external people saying things, but sometimes we make a choice of the mask that we want to put on. But sometimes they are masks that are given to us and we feel like we have to use it. We can't reject that mask.
So I think at the end of the day, we want our listeners to maybe be a bit more aware of where they use creativity. I mean, most of our listeners are probably artists at this point, but even if you're not, there is an aspect of creativity and problem solving and understanding and coming up with ideas and connecting with who you're working with or who you're interacting with in a way that is engaging that we need to embrace now more than ever when there's technology that's trying to step in and say, actually save that brain power and just let computers do it for you. Or, oh, you're for example, an accountant. That's not a creative job at all, which is a load of crap because I worked with an accountant who's lived, breathed, and ate numbers like it was, you know.
And they're often very creative with it.
Well, maybe she was, I don't know, but she was so passionate about it. It actually changed my view of accounting as a profession because it was very clearly her calling, and to get her to talk about it.
She was passionate about it and she'd chosen something that she was passionate and loved it. And it wasn't something that somebody said to her, oh, well, if you're an accountant, you'll make a bit of money, so you might as well do that. You're quite good at maths.
Yeah,
That's not a reason to be an accountant, but
yeah.
it can be the reasoning that a lot of young people choose professions.
Exactly. So looking for the creativity and how you can show up as yourself as what is historically maybe seen as a dry toast profession. So like my doctor who embraced her power as a creative person doing diagnosing, which takes skill to do, not just knowledge, but skill and to notice things is important. But as an artist, I think also not just saying, "Oh, we're so creative," but actually understanding the power of our creativity, the power that Fee used to come up with her next collection and, figure out what worked for her and what didn't, and then taking ideas and actually I'm holding my hand up as though anybody can see it because this is audio only, but actually twist it to look at it from a different angle, whether it's from the back end or from the top or from the bottom or something else. That was really a powerful, podcast episode and a powerful session of just talking back and forth as to what ideas you wanted to convey.
I would just like to share with you something that a friend of mine who said, I can't remember if it was today or yesterday, but she's not an artist. I say she's not an artist. She's not doing that as a profession, but she's probably one of the most creative people that I know. And she was saying about one of the struggles she had. She used to teach early years and trying to explain to people that you're never going to get a high quality piece of artwork or writing from a child who has never ever experienced the situation that they're writing in. So if you want them to write about a rainy day, they have to go and splash in puddles. everything is feeding into that creative muscle and going, they'll have that creative memory. They will then use that when they're asked about writing about a rainy day or painting a rainy day. They will be like, oh, yeah, it felt so amazing. But so often the experience is taken away and we're just expecting children or people to come up with something just from, and this is where they go for to AI, because their life experiences has not been enough to develop their creative muscle.
That's such a good point because the world is so different from when you and I were growing up, and I'm making us sound like we're 100 years old, but
Of which we are, obviously.
yeah, well, when I was growing up, my parents were very anti-television and anti-media. You read a book or you were outside kinda thing, and and I think that gave a lot of skills to myself and my siblings as we were growing up because we had to figure out if we wanted to create a fort, we had to figure out how to make it. If we wanted to play hide and seek, we had to figure out where to hide and everything else. There was none of this consuming of things. We were constantly producing things. And it's certainly the way that I raised my kids. They were on the cusp of all the mobile devices, but it was still go the hell outside, ride your bikes, play with their friends, and run around.
The
This is
fear of letting your child go and play outside and play with other kids and not know where they were, that is what has changed that developmental point for children and young people, because the parents have been fed a fear. You need to know where your child is all the time. You need to know what they're doing. You need to be in part of their when you talk to, like, when we were growing up, we just went out and it was like, oh, be back by tea time.
yeah.
Your parents knew that you were going off, and they didn't really, not that they didn't care or they didn't wanna know, it was about have that freedom, and that develops you as a creative 100%. Whereas if you have been shut inside, I mean, a lot of parents would say, "Oh, they're on their device all the time," but they haven't had the opportunity to go out and enjoy that. I know that there is a lot of work around forest schools, but it's not the same. It's still structured. It's not unstructured play.
Yeah, and unstructured play is important, but if you're already a grown-ass adult like we are, and I know I myself spend a lot of time inside because I'm working on my businesses and making art and whatever, we also can lose that, daily creativity in terms of problem solving and things like that. So I know for a lot of the authors that I've enjoyed reading their books, one of the ways that they start by writing is going for long walks. And I know that when I was struggling through the pandemic, that's what myself and my oldest daughter did, is we walked for 2 hours every night.
Get yourself a dog.
Apparently.
And then you still walk every day. And
Yeah, well, maybe there is an upside to dogs. I'm a cat person, so I'm not walking my cats, but it's like getting outside that experiencing things, adding to your real world experience is still important for creatives. And getting outside of your comfort zone too. One of the things I've been doing since August of last year is networking in person. Something I haven't done in over a decade because I was going to art shows and things, so I didn't need to network in person. I was already in person at things. I didn't want to see more people. But it was also just like my businesses were successful mainly because
let me just explain, that's Paula's neurodivergence. It's not that she's antisocial.
there is that, yes, I am an introvert in terms of my battery drains in social settings. So a lot of my business has been online. Even my first tech company, I saw my clients in person maybe twice a year, and I never saw my contractors in person. They just worked for me remotely. So having this ability to go out was something I need to actually rebuild and start doing that and connecting with people, not because they're other artists, not because they're potential clients, but because we get creativity from the experiences of engaging with people who are outside of our bubbles. And the algorithms on social media give us a bubble, so I'm in a very socialist bubble because 'cause I'm very left wing and I believe, that we should all have good lives and capitalism isn't the end and be all and whatever. Because 'cause we're not turning this political. But I am in that bubble on social media. My friends generally fall into that bubble in some degree, so I'm not getting different opinions. When I go out networking here in London, Ontario, London is the largest city in southwestern Ontario, but we're surrounded by farms and by people who breed horses, by people who grow our food, by people who work in the companies that build the trucks and all the things that the rest of the country needs. I'm surrounded by this variety of people, and I get to engage with them in the networking because they're all running businesses. They come to the business networking, and suddenly my creativity is added to because I wouldn't engage with them otherwise because our lives end up being so very curated. So creativity is also fed by exposure not only to the outside world and problem solving, but by exposure to other people who might not otherwise be in our lives.
I've got another good analogy as well, traveling. Okay. So some people have traveled all over the world, but they have not left the complex of the hotel. So they have been in another country, but they haven't been developed in the same way of understanding other cultures, history, whatever. i- if you go and you travel independently or go to places that perhaps other people, I'm not saying be dangerous or whatever, put yourself at risk, but the experience is like chalk and cheese. It's completely different. People come away and they have met the people, the indigenous people or the people of that nation. They've spoken to them. They have seen a different way of living just by going to a hotel and lounging by the pool and eating all your meals there is not going to develop your creative muscle or your cultural muscle or whatever you want to call it. But both people, type of people could say, I've visited this country, and this country, and this country. And it would be true,
Mhm.
but they would come away with very different understandings of what that country and that culture is.
Absolutely. I have been to, the UK 3 times now over the years, and London has not been the central focus of my visits. Because every time I've said, "Oh, I've been in London," everybody in England goes, "There's more to England than just London." Yes, there is. It's a totally different experience because London is very much catering to people in business and to the tourists and to a certain type of thing, and the minute you leave that area, you end up seeing more history and a different way of life and hearing different accents and experiencing, you know, there's such a variety and such a small landmass of people and culture just in England alone, but then you head up into Scotland, it's a whole other a ballgame, and I think it's really important. We have to feed our creativity by those experiences, by stepping out. In Canada, it's very common for us to do Cuba holidays, especially in the winter, and it's dirt cheap. It's like $2,400 Canadian, which is about 1,200 pounds, to including your flights, all your meals, all your alcohol, your entire resort stay. You just pay one fee, go there, they pick you up at the airport, drive you to the resort, and you're in Cuba, and you never leave. You never leave. And a lot of the implication is that it's very dangerous to leave, you're not welcome elsewhere, blah, 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 blah. I don't know if that's true or not. I've actually never been
It's
to Cu
fear again. I'll ask my sister. She's been to Cuba.
Yeah, but it's a lot of my friends do the Cuba tour, and I'm not definitely not judging them because in the winter in Canada, sometimes you need some vitamin
Oh,
D,
yeah, and we have the
but
same in the UK with the Canary Islands,
yeah.
winter sun, you
Yeah,
know.
exactly, exactly, but they're missing out on dealing with the local cultures and seeing how other people live and exist and just understanding. When I was in Spain, so I was there twice, I didn't go to Barcelona and everything else. I was in the non-touristy spots where very few people spoke English, so that was a shock to me because 'cause I'd never gone to a country that where English wasn't at least, fairly dominant. And the treatment I got by the local, Spanish people for not understanding very much Spanish was that I was a complete idiot. And that's fair because that's what people get when they come to English-speaking countries and can't speak the language. "Oh, you must
Yep.
be a moron. Because you can't even say hello or whatever." And so that was an eye-opening experience I cherish because I never got a chance to see the other side of things, or even the other side of what my own relatives had when they came to Canada and not speaking English or not speaking good English, being treated like a moron was incredible. And actually, it informed a lot of my writing following the trips. And I think it made me a better person, a more
Uh,
aware person. So
exactly, 100%. It's the same I get when you hear people say, "Oh, I'm no good at languages." I'm like, how can you not be? It's all about communicate. You can't be no good at language. Maybe you haven't been taught in a way that helps you learn them. But if you were dropped in another country where nobody spoke your language, you would pick it up. Everybody would pick it up. You
yeah. Yeah.
know?
Exactly, you'd have no choice. So, yeah, so then there we go with that. That's an interesting idea too. So if you dropped in another country, don't have a language in common, so you can't teach them English or whatever you speak, and they need to communicate with you, you need to communicate with them. That's when you're stretching your language muscle, your learning muscle, and your creative muscle, figuring out how to to get the basic communication. Like, if I touch my nose, am I asking you to tell me what nose is in your language? Am I asking you what's that smell? Like, we don't know until we have that common basis. When you try to create that communication, there has to be a level of creativity as well, but the biggest point is that it's a muscle that you flex to learn the language, the same way that it's a muscle that you flex for your creativity. So as artists, I think it's important to have conversations with other artists, other creatives, as well as people outside your circles. So when Fee and I are talking in this podcast, but also the millions of hours we talk outside of the podcast, and bouncing ideas off of each other, that allows us to hold up ideas between us, turn them around and go yes, no, or whatever. It really works our creativity muscle. So at the end of the day, I think the most important thing to take away from this episode, perhaps, is that A, creativity is everywhere. Become aware of the creativity that you wield, even if you aren't creating visual arts. And B, it requires practice and maybe it requires community as well. Talking through things, playing with ideas, and not being emotionally tied up with our ideas. If I say to Fee, "Well, that thing you thought of was a little bit shit," she doesn't go, "My life is over, you've made a personal attack, and I'm now gonna make a little effigy of you, Paula, and stick pins in it." She's gonna go, "Actually, you know what? Maybe it was a little bit shit, but this tiny bit of it wasn't. How can we stretch that?"
Putting that, learning and positive spin, it's not personal, and then not being afraid to take risks, not being afraid for things to not go exactly as you planned. All of that is where creativity comes from.
The risk taking is a big one. So, let's wrap up with this other thought. I come across artists who are afraid to do things wrong, are afraid to show up in case they show up wrong, are afraid to take risks in their art making because it might be wrong. What is this wrong? What is this wrong? Everything we do can, whether it supposedly succeeds or not, everything we do feeds into our experiences, our skills, and our moving forward. It feeds our creativity. So there is no wrong or right, and everything is made up anyway, so who cares? Just do it.
As we've said before, we are reclaiming our own narrative, and there is no thing about this is wrong and this is right.
And that's where we are gonna leave this episode of Art Crush. So thank you, Fee, for joining me and having this chat, and thank you to our listeners for listening. We are, you'll have noticed, changing up the Art Crush release. So we're not gonna release episodes in a clump. We're gonna release them weekly as we go so that there's a constant drip of Art Crush available on your Spotify, Apple Podcasts, and other podcast apps. And of course, if you are in the UK or near Derby in May, you can come and meet us in person, the fabulous Fee Marks and Paula Telizyn, as well as the other members of the 51% at our show. Watch social media for the advertisements, the marketing as we go through this year. And do make an effort to come and join us because it'll be fun to join us in person at our inaugural show in Derby. So, yes, exciting times.
And the first of many.
Exactly. Check out Fee's art on her website at feemarks-art.co.uk and my own work on my website at paulatelysian.com, and we will see you in the next episode.